and hi all of you. I'm Ashwini Siddhi here, Director of Product Security Engineering at GoDaddy. I'd spent about 15 years and more in the security industry and honestly stopped counting after a while. And I've spent considerable time doing SDL, all facets of SDL like pen testing, threat modeling, across the different development phases, right? And I've mostly spend my time on-prem, but with the rise in cloud adoption, my current focus in my current role is orchestrating SDL in the cloud. So I think this is a great platform to be talking about the same. So I'm eager to dive deeper into it and share my lessons and all of the insights that I've had at GoDaddy doing this over a period of time. So without much ado, let's dive deeper and look at what we have on the agenda for us today. So we'll talk about SDL plus the cloud and the not so obvious considerations, some things that don't really pop out to us right away, but is certainly critical to the success of the SDL in the cloud, and a potential solution that has worked for us, which is also in progress. But obviously, I'm not going to give out like the organizational details. We'll keep it to a high level, and we'll conclude on that. So the topic on SDL, right? All of us here know what SDL is, the Secure Development Lifecycle. It's been around since early 2000s. After Bill Gates put out the trusted computing memo, SDL was the result of all of the collaborative work in Microsoft, and there's been considerable adoption across the industry, obviously with the varying maturity. Somebody's like at a great cutting edge maturity, whereas some organization is still at a very compliant level, just probably doing a threat modeling and a code review and a minimal amount of security testing. But yes, adoption and maturity varies. But after that, we've had automation come into picture. We have had the DevSecOps to integrate into CI/CD pipeline. And so great innovations along the way. And it's still continuing, right? There is no full stop to it. We've not reached a stage where we say, yes, SDL is completely matured and we have a framework that works for all. With evolving technology, with evolving threats, there's always so much more to do. And cloud brings in these additional dimensions into SDL that we'll need to consider. And when I talk about cloud, it's not always about putting out your workload on the cloud, right? Using a third-party service provider. It could be that all of your development is moving to the cloud. So companies and organizations that use modern technologies that build web apps and mobile solutions, mobile apps, services, all of these tend to be on the cloud. So the adoption of cloud is also for the development, right? So it's much earlier and not just being deployed out there. So that brings in a variety of dimensions to consider for our SDL. Yes, the principles of SDL of shifting security left, of the security first mindset. Security is not just the security team's responsibility. It starts with the development team. Security is for everybody. All of that still holds true. But obviously, there are new aspects to it. So let's jump into what it looks like. So the first thing is planning. We all know that we need to plan for SDL in terms of, okay, create a backlog. We need to invest time in doing threat modeling. We need to invest time in looking at the scan results and triaging them, and also going back and fixing all of the results that have come out of these activities. So that's a no-brainer. All of us know it because it's been existing for the on-prem SDL too. But what's newer with the cloud aspect is that when you try to go provision a project, you create your accounts and then you create your resources. You want them to be secure right from the start. You want these resources to be configured securely. You're not waiting until production to configure these resources to be secure. So what do? So there comes these policies and security requirements, right? So this is the additional consideration with respect to planning, with respect to security requirements that you'll need to consider. And then comes the design phase where threat modeling and security architecture review comes into picture. A lot of them don't really get into security architecture review these days because most people believe documentation is outdated. So they don't have documentation, but that's an organizational policy, whether you would like to have one or not. But with respect to threat modeling, there are newer threats, very specific threats that apply to the cloud, right? Like some of the resources are very transient in nature. So what happens is they are bought up only for a specific action to be run. And once that is achieved, it goes down again. It's not up and running anymore, like serverless functions, etc. Right? So the risks around these transient resources, which could potentially leave behind certain actions, certain sensitive data, and hence be vulnerable to data leakage and all of that, is relevant. And also things like shared resources. You're sharing infrastructure across multiple projects, even within the same organization. So it means that probably your secrets are shared too. So there is the potential of insider threats. So there are different threats that come into the picture. So your threat modeling will have to consider all of these dimensions. The process of you doing threat modeling would remain the same, but the aspects that you consider for threat modeling would differ in terms of these newer threats, in terms of geographical locations, in terms of how you want to store your data, whether you want to include compliance into this aspect, whether you want to bring privacy into this aspect. So a lot of additional dimensions that you need to consider here. And then comes the code analysis. Yes, obviously, you're looking at the workload, the code of the workload. But with respect to code, again, there are cloud-specific APIs that come into pictures and specific services from the cloud that come into picture, which you could potentially have to review. It could be anything like an overly permissive serverless function. So n number of different things like that. And a lot of these functions rely on third-party components, right? So your software composition analysis becomes important too. What tools are you using there? And if you do not have a tool, how are you achieving it manually? And things like that. So that is one of the considerations for your SDL. And the verification aspect, when you move to the testing phase, would depend. Do you have like a suite of tests written manually, customized for your organization, or you go line by line and do it? I don't think anybody does that, but just in case you're doing it, I hope you're not doing it. And then we have the fuzzing, special focus on the different network zones, fuzzing around the zones itself come into the picture. And if there's a web component, obviously the traditional DAST scanning also comes into the picture. So all of this pretty much applies to the traditional SDL also, outside of the special cases of policies, the different threats I spoke about, the APIs and the code around cloud itself, and the fuzzing of the network entities and the segmentation and all of these things are the additional criteria for SDL in the cloud. Then comes the really interesting aspect when we are almost near production, right? It is pre-deployment. Yes, we talk a lot about shifting security left and all of these things. But there are some specifics like, okay, how do I plan for incident response? Yes, you need to have a plan. Traditionally, this has not been included in SDL, but we will need to plan this. We'll need to include this. We'll need to have a document which can be reviewed by the security team, which needs to be updated when things change. We'll also need to plan for an incident response testing and penetration testing if and when applicable. Obviously, it comes with a cost, so you wouldn't be doing it all the time. And auditing. When I say auditing, you've had some sort of policies defined earlier in the life cycle. It's been applied, but you've moved across the different environments, your development environment, your testing environment, your near production environment. So you want to do that final check before you get into production again. So what is the best way you can audit it? Not get your hands dirty again completely and start from scratch, but at least like do a light touch auditing of it to ensure or to double check that all of these things that you've done are still in place and somebody has not already changed it for you, right? Like so these are the additional things that comes into picture with respect to the SDL for cloud. But we're talking about orchestrating SDL. So you are the team that is orchestrating SDL for your organization. In that case, you will also have to worry about not just how the SDL process flows for the cloud, but you'll also have to think about your network security, right? Do I have the right IDS and IPS? Do I have the network firewalls enabled? Do I have the right data loss prevention tools there to prevent leakages from, let's say, S3 buckets or any other storage for that matter? How am I achieving my posture management, my workload protection? Am I using custom tools, or have I written custom scripts, or have I paid a lot of money and bought in different tools from the market, right? So n number of things: malware scanning, container scanning, malware scanning, not just for your workload to check if there's malware within your code, but also on the environments itself, scanning for malware. So a lot of things come into the picture here, which is outside of the SDL also, right? So the boundary between SDL and orchestrating SDL becomes very fuzzy when we talk about infrastructure. So how do you drive this? Typically, using a GRC framework, you set a policy that everybody, even on the cloud, will have to go through a so-and-so process, should adopt to a secure development lifecycle, and then have the right standards. And the policy might look very similar to SDL traditionally, but when it comes down to standards, that's when things change. Because here we would have IAM policies. We clearly call out what are the different roles available, what are the different roles that you can request for as a team, right, as a project. And if you need something beyond it, accepted roles, what is the process to go around that? How are we called out this exception in our policy or in our standard? What are the controls and requirements that support our standard, right? So we'll have to write standards and ensure that the organization aligns to it in terms of what policies we need with respect to identity and access management, with respect to secrets, with respect to introducing redundancy, with respect to storing our data, protecting our data, sensitive information. So all of the design principles will have to be translated into standards and how we want to control them. So this is like what a typical SDL for the cloud would look like. And as we can see here, it falls under 3 different pillars: one of the SDL itself, and then the infrastructure to orchestrate this, and then the framework or the process to drive this. So these are the obvious considerations, but yes, there could be something more that we've never really thought about, right? Unless you try to get your hands dirty and go down to implement this, there are things that pop out to you and it's like, oh yes, I never thought about these things. So at least for us, that's how it has been. So what do they look like? Obviously, with n number of different scans happening every release, we would like automation. We cannot expect teams to do things manually, even for things like security testing, all of these, right? Activities, you need to be automated. If you're not automated, the time to market is so much more higher. The time for security activities is so much more higher. We lose out on the competitive edge. Obviously, any competitor that is out in the industry has that much time over you to go out and market the similar product or etc. Right? So automation is very important, not in terms of ease of use and to eliminate human error, but also in terms of time to market and to retain that competitive edge in the market. Automation becomes important. And performance. We spoke about n number of scans happening simultaneously, right? So we do not want to run into a situation of resource exhaustion, considering that we have so many resources being used from the cloud and so many endpoints being open with respect to APIs. It's already vulnerable to DDoS, and if not enabled, rate limiting, all of these things, right? So performance with multiple scans being run simultaneously, also considering that when we are on the cloud, we're not looking at traditional releases like 3 months or once in 6 months. We're probably looking at a release once in a day too, right? It could depend. The cadence could depend on your team, your organization. So performance matters in such a situation. And comes the cost aspect. And when I'm talking about cost, most people would probably think that it's just about licensing, etc. But it could also be about the resources on your cloud platform itself. What are the different resources that you're being used? And when you start doing all of these scans, when you automate all of these security verification activities, what is the cost burden that comes into the picture, right? So this is something that you have to be mindful of, especially in this economic situation. It becomes very important. The right process, having the right way of working defined will save you a lot of money. And I think that can be the deciding factor if your SDL is good to go ahead, or, if it's effective, or you need to make changes to it. So it's not just about people and manual ease. It's also about time to market. It's about performance, quick results, and also about being cost effective and keeping in the budget constraints and all of that. And when you're talking about orchestrating SDL for an organization, you're talking about n number of different projects, maybe different business units too. Each of them potentially could have different technology stack, different levels of adoption of SDL, and also meaning that they have different threats that are relevant to them. And also their release cycles could be different, right? So meaning that different security verification activities are applicable to them, and they might have different execution schedules. So meaning that somebody, for some project, for a specific AWS account, threat modeling is important, but maybe for somebody else, it's not really relevant. Just a specific scan, like code scanning, is required. Maybe for another project, a container scanning becomes important. Maybe another project is not really using it, so it's not applicable. So what are the different scans that are applicable? What are their execution schedules like? You cannot have a single switch across your organization because you come from a centralized security organization. There has to be an ability to run these scans on demand, and not all of these scans, but like a subset of scans for specific accounts, and also have the ability for these specific projects to themselves request for these scans, right? So that they have the control, which means that security is truly shifted left and it is everybody's responsibility. And that is why execution schedule becomes really important. Even otherwise, right? I mean, we are talking about multiple projects, but maybe just look at one project. I would like to have drift detection. I would like to probably continuously monitor my S3 buckets. What are the permissions like? What is being written to it, etc. Right? So that might probably require continuous monitoring, but I might not require code scanning continuously, right? So there is a difference in the schedule for execution for each of these scans itself within a single project. So the complexity is so much more higher. It is not across different projects, but it is within a specific project itself. Now, again, for a given specific project, you have n number of accounts, one for the development account and maybe 2, 3 for a testing environment, and 4, 5 for a different environment, right? But obviously they shouldn't be having one for production. Then you're doing something wrong. So that's about it. And that's a bigger complexity than probably building automation. I think all of us have people who can write scripts for us and build automation, and performance can be achieved with some amount of testing. We can set up alerts to notify us if the cost has gone above and beyond. But the execution schedule is one of the complex areas with respect to orchestrating SDL, right? So that's something that we need to be mindful of. And at the end, reporting and publishing. So this becomes really important in terms of how you want to translate the findings to your leadership. You need to have specific findings within your project so that you can have access to look at them and address them, put them in your backlog. But there also has to be capability for the leadership to be able to take a look at it, right? So the different views, different access controls around it, and how you want to build it, etc., is also a consideration around it. Do you want to put it on the cloud itself? Do you want to have a web application for it? Do you want to build a dashboard? A number of considerations again to it on how you want to report and publish it. And this is very organizational specific. So with these considerations and with the idea of what SDL for cloud looks like, I'll show you what could be a potential solution to automate SDL. All right. So you have an audit account in your cloud, which is like the master security account, right? And it can push tasks into every single project. So all of these projects obviously are on the cloud, and they have these accounts on the cloud, and they've been provisioned as such with all of these resources. So the master security account pushes these tasks to each of the project based on the schedule, and the tasks get executed. Again, could be all of the scans, or depending upon what the requirement is, or only specific scans, right? So the tasks are run, and the results of it is stored within the project account for the project view. And also it goes back to a centralized dashboard within the same account for the leadership to view the same, right? So you have access both at the project level, and the leadership has access at the master security account. But again, we spoke about cost. So if I have like this, a scenario like this where you could initiate a scan anytime, obviously resources are going to be continuously consumed, and you're going to run into a really long bill. So how do we address this? So the idea here is to come up with serverless functions such that you spawn a single entity of a scan for a given project account. It's transient in nature. It's triggered when the task is run, and once the task is completed, it dies out, and only the results of it is stored. So that way it's serverless, and it's not running when the scans are not run, and no excess consumption of cost happen there. So that's how we probably reduce cost, one of the ways to reduce cost. And the other aspect is that we spoke about reducing shared risks, right? So when we talk about reducing shared risks, it also means that when I try to run a scan, example, let's say a Nessus scan for vulnerability management, in an on-prem solution, I just give the IP address, and you could probably scan that entire environment. But you might also need to open up some specific ports. But might not really work on the cloud because you have n different projects running. You might not want to scan them all at once. What you might want to do is scan each individual project. So how would you do that? So you would ensure that it is containerized. It is not dependent on any specific language, and it can be customized so that for project one, I can spawn Nessus and I can run it, and then it finds me issues. For project two, I can spawn a different instance of Nessus, and they are two different Nessus scans running, probably which are parallel, right? If the performance is good, but they are two different entities. They're not the same thing, right? So I could do that when I have tried to containerize it and ensure that it is spawned within a specific VPC and tied to it, and not across the complete cloud, right? So that becomes important for us to ensure that we reduce shared project scans. And also another thing into consideration here is that when it comes to cloud, we have different zones. Yes, on-prem also we have different zones, but on the cloud, we have compliance that is strictly need to be adhered to. So if it's like a PCI zone, we probably do not want to make those changes of opening up ports specifically for a scan. It's also a wait time. You raise a request, wait for them to open up these ports, and then you initiate the scan, and then you potentially wait to see, okay, if this is impacting something or not, and then run the scan. So it's a lot of work, right? When you don't have these dependencies, when you can spawn a scan specifically within a VPC, it is so much more easier. You're not delving into changing ports and configurations. So things are as is. So that's one of the other advantages too. So we ensure that this is containerized, and we ensure that it is per project and not across the cloud. And we also ensure that this is serverless. That's how we are not running into high bills. And this is how we can potentially build a solution, which is like a wrapper to include all scans, right? When I say a master security account, it is more like a wrapper. It's an automation script, and I can plug in any security tool I would like to here. I could probably add a code scanner. I could add Nessus. I could add any vulnerability management scanning tool. I could write my own custom tool. I could write a posture management tool by myself. Maybe I do not want to spend on all of these tools because they're so expensive. So we could custom write something on cloud security posture management. We could have something that constantly looks for any changes in the configuration, any drift detection. So all of these tools can be combined into a single entity and put across the pipeline of all different projects within an organization. So this can be developed as a wrapper with any language of your preference and put in across to drive SDL across the organization. So this is what I think SDL for cloud looks like, and this is something that has worked for us. It's obviously work in progress. There are a lot of things you could continue to do, but I do want to call out that not one size fits all. There's obviously some elements that come into the picture which is prevalent to a specific organization, which you might need to consider. So the idea here is to not stick to a framework or anything that somebody's talking about. The idea here with respect to SDL in the cloud is to ensure that we're providing anyone in the organization who could positively influence security of our products or our systems or anything that we're developing with awareness, resources, and training, right? Training is an important part of SDL too, to successfully build security into the systems. So the idea is to provide with resources and training to ensure that SDL is built into the systems, even if they are on the cloud, to still shift security left and still have the security first mindset, even if you're on the cloud. So I stress on even if you're on the cloud, because the minute we move to the cloud, there are new complexities. A lot of people are still learning cloud. Not everybody is really well versed with cloud. So in their head, the complexity is all about the cloud. Okay, how do I learn about all of these different components on the cloud? How do I learn about all of these resources? There's so much configuration. How do I manage all of these policies? So the focus is right out there, and security is like just goes out of the window. So that is why I specifically stress, even if you're on the cloud, the idea is to just train and provide awareness and resources to build security into systems. And that would be SDL for the cloud for you. I'm available on LinkedIn, so feel free to ping me anytime you would like. And I would love to discuss more about SDL and cloud in general and cloud security in general. If you have any questions, or if you have any ideas, or if you disagree with me on something, just hit me up, and then we can have this discussion. I love talking about security, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. I hope this was useful. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you.